From an early age, I spent most of my free time in the veld, playing and fighting with the other boys of the village. A boy who remained at home, tied to his mother's apron strings, was regarded as a sissy. At night, I shared my food and blanket with these same boys. I was no more than 5 when I became a herd boy, looking after sheep and calves in the fields. I discovered the almost mythical attachment that the Xhosa have for cattle, not only as a source of food and wealth, but as a blessing from God and a source of happiness. As boys, we were mostly left to our own devices. We played with toys we made ourselves. We molded animals and birds out of clay. We made ox-drawn sledges out of tree branches. Nature was our playground. I learnt my lesson one day from an unruly donkey. We had been taking turns climbing up and down its back. When my chance came, I jumped on, and the donkey bolted into a nearby thorn bush. It bent its head, trying to unseat me, which it did, but not before the thorns had pricked and scratched my face, embarrassing me in front of my friends. Like the people of the East, Africans have a highly developed sense of dignity, or what the Chinese call face. I had lost face among my friends. Even though it was a donkey that unseated me, I learnt that to humiliate another person is to make him suffer an unnecessary cruel fate. Even as a boy, I defeated my opponents without dishonoring them. After games such as these, I would return to my mother's kraal, where she was preparing supper, whereas my father once told stories of historic battles and heroic Xhosa warriors. My mother would enchant us with Xhosa legends and fables that had come down from numberless generations. These tales stimulated my childish imagination and usually contained some moral lesson. I recall once my mother told us about a traveler who was approached by an old woman with terrible cataracts on her eyes. The woman asked the traveler for help, and the man averted his eyes. Then another man came along and was approached by the old woman. She asked him to clean her eyes, and even though he found the task unpleasant, he did as she asked. Then, miraculously, the scales fell from the woman's eyes, and she became young and beautiful. The man married her and became wealthy and prosperous. It is a simple tale, but with a strong message. Virtue and generosity will be rewarded in ways that one cannot know. Like all Xhosa children, I acquired knowledge mainly through observation. We were meant to learn through imitation and emulation, not through questions. When I first visited the homes of whites, I was often dumbfounded by the number and nature of questions that children asked their parents, and the parents' unfailing willingness to answer them. In my household, questions were considered a nuisance. Adults imparted such information as they considered necessary. One day, George Mbekela paid a visit to my mother. "Your son is a clever young fellow," he said. "He should go to school." My mother remained silent. No one in my family had ever attended school, and my mother was unprepared for Mbekela's suggestion. But she did relay it to my father, who, despite, or perhaps because of, his own lack of education, immediately decided that his youngest son should go to school. The schoolhouse consisted of a single room with a Western-style roof. On the other side of the Kunu Hills, I was 7 years old, and on the day before I was to begin, my father took me aside and told me that I must be dressed properly for school. Until that time, I, like all the other boys in Kunu, had worn only a blanket, which was wrapped around one shoulder and pinned at the waist. My father took a pair of his trousers and cut them at the knee. He told me to put them on, which I did, and they were roughly the correct length, although the waist was far too large. My father then took a piece of string and tied the trousers at the waist. It must have been a comical sight, but I have never owned a suit that I was prouder to wear than my father's cut-off trousers. On the first day of school, my teacher, Miss Mdingane, gave each of us an English name and said that henceforth that was the name we would answer to in a hoot. This was the custom among Africans in those days, and was undoubtedly due to the British bias of our education. The education I received was a British education, in which British ideas, British culture, and British institutions were automatically assumed to be superior. There was no such thing as African culture. Africans of my generation, and even today, generally have both a Western and an African name. That day, Miss Mdingane told me that my name was Nelson. Why she bestowed this particular name upon me, I have no idea. Perhaps it had something to do with the great British sea captain, Lord Nelson, but that would be only a guess.